Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for Health Professional Radio. We'll be speaking with Saad Harti in this segment, founder and CEO of Swiss-based LegacyHealthcare. He's joining us to discuss the company's positive phase 2 and 3 data and filing of their lead prescription botanical drug for the treatment of alopecia. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Saad Harti. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks for hosting me.
You're founder and CEO of LegacyHealthcare. Did you start out in healthcare?
So in a nutshell, my very first professional experience was in the pharma industry indeed, but then I shifted to finance and M&A for several years. And then I came back to the healthcare industry, to the pharma industry through the business development angle. And I started LegacyHealthcare back in 2012 with the idea to bring hopefully the first botanical drug to treat a complex disease. This vision was there from day one, and we're probably about to achieve it, hopefully.
What exactly is a botanical drug?
So back in 2004, not long ago, if we look at the life cycle of drugs, both the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the European Medicine Agency have introduced a new pathway to develop prescription drugs. And this is called botanical drug in the US, and it's called herbal medicine in Europe. But that's the same, exactly the same. So with this regulation, prescription drug can now be made from full plant extracts. So what do we mean by full plant extracts? It means that the whole of the plant is used to make the drug. We remove nothing from the plant and we add nothing. So all the molecules that the plant naturally contains are present in the drug. So in essence, a botanical drug is a multi-molecule drug.
Now, as far as these drugs being botanical drugs, are they undergoing the same clinical pathway as far as development as other drugs do for approval?
Absolutely. All prescription drugs, regardless of what they're made of, undergo the same pathway to demonstrate both safety and efficacy. So just like synthetic drugs or biological drugs, which represent today the majority of the available drugs, botanical drugs needs to demonstrate clinical efficacy in multi-center, double-blind, randomized controlled trial in order to be approved. There is strictly no difference. And that's important. Otherwise, there will be no guarantee of their efficacy.
Is there more cost involved? Is it more involved? I'm trying to understand why this hasn't been done or attempted a long time ago as opposed to now.
Sure. It's not much a matter of cost. If you think of it, a synthetic drug is a chemical entity which you can replicate infinitely with always the exact same characteristics. So you're sure to provide the patient with the exact same dose of your drug, one batch after the next. And therefore, you have a certain confidence on the level of efficacy you're going to deliver. Plants, on the reverse, on the contrary, are naturally variable. Plants are naturally variable in the sense that in nature, nothing is industrial. Everything is unique. So one batch will always have variabilities versus the next and versus the previous one. The challenge was therefore to have drugs with replicable and constant efficacy one batch after the next, while your active substance, your starting material is variable, and that's a challenge. However, the regulation has evolved, and FDA has changed its regulation, has adapted its regulation to this reality very early, back in 2016. So we're talking literally few years back, so that the requirement is not to show identical batch replicability, which, as I've said, is impossible, but to demonstrate that the natural variability that those plants will carry do not alter the clinical efficacy of the batches that you're going to make. So they explain exactly how you need to do it, and if you follow the rule one step after the next, you should be able to show that. And that was the big change. And we have to say that it's very recent. So if you consider that this change happened back in 2016, there was very little chance that many drugs have been developed since then. So that's really a new field, and this is what explains why very little number of botanical drugs have been developed so far.
Now, I said that your company is working on a botanical drug to treat the autoimmune condition called alopecia. Tell us a bit about your knowledge of alopecia, and then talk about this new compound that you're working to get approved.
Sure. So alopecia is any form of hair loss and hair disorder. There are many forms, and the most severe form of all alopecias is something called alopecia areata, and this is an autoimmune condition, like psoriasis can be, or vitiligo, or to a certain extent atopic dermatitis. So this is a complex autoimmune chronic condition where your own cells, which are supposed to protect your body, are attacking, in the case of alopecia areata, the hair follicle cells. So let's call it alopecia for simplicity, but making sure that we're talking of the autoimmune form of hair disorder. So until recently, there was no drug approved for this disease. Only 2 drugs have been approved so far, and I'm happy to comment on them after, but let's first explain where we are now. So we have just recently completed a phase 2/3 registration trial, which has demonstrated the clinical efficacy and safety of our drug versus placebo, along with improvement of quality of life of the patients. And with that, we have been able to file the drug, which name is Coacillium, for approval with the European Medicine Agency in June 2023, so very recently. And we expect the approval to happen sometime next year. Regarding FDA, we started to have interaction with FDA, and we hope that we will be able to file in the next few months this drug for the U.S. as well.
Now, obviously, your compound would have some benefits over the current standard. What would be the benefit in your opinion?
Sure, absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, 2 drugs have been approved for the treatment of alopecia areata just recently in June 2022 and June 23. So we're talking, a year ago. The first one was developed by Lilly and the second one by Pfizer. So that's a field with strong interest from large pharmaceutical industries. The 2 drugs from Lilly and Pfizer belong both to a class of drug called JAK inhibitors. These are potent immunosuppressant drugs, so very relevant to address an autoimmune condition. And they demonstrated excellent efficacy in the patients that have been exposed to the drug. Now, they have unfortunately 2 limitations, despite the fact that this is an amazing progress for patients, and I want to insist on that. The first limitation is related to the safety profile of these drugs. They come with side effects, some very serious. They have a black box warning, as we call it, because of the serious infection, which can start because of the immunosuppression and up to death. That's mentioned in the patient prescribing information. And because of that, and because drugs are approved based on their benefit risk, they have been restricted, the use of these drugs is restricted to the most severe cases of the disease. But the majority of patients who present to disease have only a moderate form of it. Some may say, well, who cares? We need to treat severe patients. On the contrary, it's the reverse, actually. Most of these chronic conditions start mild, moderate, and then they progress. So it's essential to treat patients early in their disease to prevent the disease progression to a more severe form. It's like calling the fire brigade once the house is burned down. You have to call them early when the fire starts. So our drug Coacillium has a clean safety profile. It means it has no immunosuppressant side effect. It has only some mild or moderate local side effect on the skin, and which disappear when the drug is interrupted shortly. And because of this, the drug has been allowed to be tested on patients with the early form of the disease, with the moderate form of the disease. So in addition to the severe form of the disease, which the drug is allowed to treat, we can also treat moderate form patients. It means that our drug serves all populations with alopecia, not only the fraction which has the most severe form. So that's the first advantage. The second is that despite their efficacy, JAK inhibitors, when they're discontinued, and sometimes they have to be, the treatment comes back very quickly. So hair falls back again. In our trial, we have observed that most patients maintain the drug benefit up to 6 months after treatment discontinuation. This doesn't mean that the disease is gone, but it means that patients do not need probably lifelong treatment. And that could represent a major progress.
I know that your company recently conducted a poll to gauge interest in botanical drugs. What are consumers saying?
Sure. So Harris Poll conducted a survey for us with 2,000 American adults. We asked people if they were diagnosed with a chronic illness that require intake of a prescription drug, would they choose a prescription botanical drug or a synthetic or biological drug? And the preference of the majority was to choose the botanical prescription drug. So we believe that botanical drugs represent really the future for the treatment of chronic conditions, but not only because they can do and they can work as good as the synthetic cousin, but because this is what people want.
Saad, give us a website where our listeners can learn much more.
Sure. So www.LegacyHealthcare.ch.
Thank you so much for giving us this information this morning, and I'm hoping that you'll return as registration and development continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving us the chance.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Saad Harti. Audio copies of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au, also at Anchor, Spotify, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.